organized now. This guy is 25, 6, 7, and 8. So we're going to look on here. That's this chunk. And then 25 is 2 inches. So we'll go set the saw to 2 inches. So we're building a snowman for Carolina's shoe. And by we, I mean me.
Do you want to build a snowman?
Not particularly. We don't even have any snow. Well, that's not a problem. We have poplar. Okay. So the secret to my madness is on this paper right here. Wait, no. Math. This starts as a SketchUp drawing my snowman shape, which is also the same method I use for vases and bowls too. And once the voluptuous curves of my snowman are set, I divide that up based on the thickness of the rings that I choose, which in this case is a bit under 2 inches. Then from there, I can use the curvature at each point to determine the appropriate wall thickness of each ring. The details of the segments that will make up these rings is determined using this spreadsheet that I made, which is available as a free download on my website. I decided to make my rings out of 20 segments, and the ring diameter is pulled from my SketchUp drawing for each ring. The angle of my cut is the same for each ring, but the spreadsheet also spits out the length that I need to cut the segments at, along with the total length of material needed for each ring. And repeating this math for all of my rings is how we end up with this beauty right here. With all the strips cut to width, I verify that I have the correct length of material needed for each ring, and then make any adjustments. Of course, I also have something up my sleeve for cutting the segments, and that's this, the miter set. If you haven't seen this before, it's a precisely milled block of aluminum where you just simply move the pin into the designated hole for however many segments you want, and it perfectly sets your miter gauge at the angle with no fuss. I'll also link this down below. From there, I cut that angle at the end of my first strip, mark the long side of that with the length of the segment for that particular ring, and then use the curve cut in my miter gauge fence and line up the cut. Moving my table saw fence over locks in this length of all the segments in this ring, and then my first segment is cut. Just need to repeat this 699 more times. When it's all done, it'll be 5 feet tall, 6 feet including the hat. It's a bit bigger than it was in my head. This always seems to happen to me. Let's start with the easiest ball, the small one. I use the drum sander to flatten out the rings and bring them down to their final thickness. Now the glue ups to create these balls are pretty tricky. They get glued up in sections, but with some planning ahead to make sure that I have a way to clamp them together. Alright. I make sure to center the rings on one another, along with bisecting the segment from the previous layer. And that little wiggle move right there is how you take advantage of the capillary action of the wet glue to hold your pieces in place before you get any clamps on. Math and science in one video, and you thought I was just building a silly snowman. Now on to the more difficult balls. My trick for sanding these larger rings flat is to send them into the drum sander and then rotate them until the entire ring has been sanded. Once you get good, you can get fancy and lower the sanding head at the same time too. Or you also have the option to not get fancy at all. Now the trick for perfectly bisecting the segments on each ring is to mark out the center point on a handful of segments on each ring. These marks are used to line up the ring on the one below it, and by lining up the center point marks on the joints below, this also centers the rings on one another at the same time. Pretty clever geometry going on here for just a simple Instagram model. Ever have trouble carrying your balls around because they're just so massive? Tell me about it. And I wouldn't be able to do it without my Carolina shoe work boots. limited edition two-tone amp style boots. Check out these and the rest of their styles and their apparel too. Link is down below, along with a coupon code too. Anyway, I now have 3 much too heavy ballish shapes that I need to make into smooth snowballs. First step is defining the circles where the balls will join together. No, silly, that compass isn't gonna work. In my latest episode of solving problems that I created for myself, I make myself a giant compass. So I just draw up a giant compass and cut it on my CNC. The design is inspired by an antique compass that my friend Jimmy DiResta has, which I once used to make a giant roll of toilet paper. My job is weird.
Cut it from the waist. Use your whole body. That's it. Not the arms, the whole body. That's good, I guess.
The 2 pieces of the compass are just a mirror image of one another, connected with a screw and a wing nut. After drilling out a hole for a Sharpie on one side and a nail on the other side to act as a pivot point, I just do a little bit of cleanup, and then the marker is held in with friction, but the nail is held in with Total Boat 4-minute epoxy because I need to get back to work. To create a center point on my hollow balls, I temporarily hot glue a piece of plywood roughly in the middle, and then use that to mark and find the center. And then I draw a big circle around it. I just have to set my radius using my ruler, and that radius is the same on the 2 faces where each of the balls stack on one another. So at this point in the project, I had an idea. Wouldn't it be funny if I managed to fit myself inside the big balls and then create a shot in the video where I surprise you by popping out of them? Sounds hilarious. Turns out I can squeeze myself inside of them, but getting out, that's a problem. After literally being stuck inside for 5 minutes, I'm not even kidding, I managed to wedge my finger between the balls just enough to free myself. You never realize you're actually claustrophobic until you're stuck inside your own balls. And you can quote me on that. Dying in there would be kind of poetic though. Ending things in the same place that I started. Alright, enough playing around. It's time to get these balls carved down to shape. And how lucky is this that I just happen to have this brand new tool that is designed for this exact task. The Spheroplane from Arbortech. Just like most of their power carving tools, this fits onto the arbor of any standard angle grinder. And the Spheroplane has a built-in collar that adjusts up and down to act as a guide to create perfect round curves, both concave and convex. With the cutter head protruding from the guide, you can dish out bowls, and with an inset, you can carve the outside of bowls, or even full-on spheres like me. It's kind of slow going, just nibbling away a little bit at a time, but it's surprisingly accurate and incredibly easy too. The only tricky part is dialing in the radius. That's too light of a cut, but that's too aggressive of a cut. And that is just right. With the balls of the snowman complete, I need to find a way to attach them together. So I line up the first pair, and then climb under and drill out some holes where I'll install screws to connect the bottom and the top rings to each other. The top part gets threaded inserts installed in it, and then the screws can pass through the top ring of the bottom ball and thread into the bottom ring of the top ball, locking everything together. I repeat this same process for the big pair of balls too, and then all you have to do is climb inside and screw it together. Ah, you hired one of Santa's elves to climb inside and put the snowman together instead of getting stuck again. Smart move, Jackman. The snowman still needs some personality, though. I'll do that with oak and maple for the carrot nose, walnut for the buttons, and mahogany for the eyes and mouth. Alright, I think we're in the home stretch now. A final sanding is still needed on the balls. I marked them with a pencil to help keep track of where I've sanded so far, and start by sanding with 120 grit. Then I mark it again, and sand with 150. Mark it again, sand again, until I get up to 220 grit. Now it's time to protect my balls. And whenever I do that, the only thing I trust is Totalboat. In this case, I'll be using Totalboat's Halcyon Clear Gloss Varnish. And yes, that is my chair on their new label. Not to brag or anything. So it's just a matter of rolling on the varnish and then tipping off any bubbles or drips with a brush, working my way around the balls and the buttons. It ended up being a surprisingly tricky shape to varnish, but I got it done. After the first coat, I like to do a light sanding by hand with 220, since the water-based varnish tends to raise the grain a little bit. But after that, I just simply build up another 5 coats on top of that. And while the varnish is drying, I'm able to fit in a few more unnecessary yet necessary extra details. that's a wrap on the giant wooden snowman. Everyone should make one of these. It's better than one made of snow because it won't melt, and I can't think of any other reasons. But a huge thanks to all of my sponsors who made this build and video possible. Without them, I wouldn't be able to pull off weird builds like this. I specifically want to shout out Carolina Shoe. I've been exclusively wearing their work boots daily for almost a decade now and can't recommend them enough. Use the link down below to check out everything they have to offer, and there's even a coupon valid for a limited time for all of my favorites. And their lineup of styles is constantly changing, and as you saw in this video, they're expanding their apparel line too. I'm a big fan. Do yourself a favor and pick up your next favorite pair of boots and workwear. Thanks to them, and thanks to you for watching. I'll see you soon for another easy and practical build like this one.